we have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
This is Multipolarity, charting the rise of the new multipolar world order. For as long as I can remember, the special relationship, the so-called special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom has been the cornerstone of Britain's foreign policy and has really seemed to be characterized by a genuine closeness. At least that's the public persona. When I was a little boy, there was a great deal of affinity, apparently, between Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister, and Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. And Britain and the US seemed only to draw closer in foreign policy terms when Tony Blair became Prime Minister and America embarked on its project for the new American century and its attempt to remake the world in America's liberal, free trade capitalist image. But I get the increasing feeling that it has been one of those things where the more you have to talk about how strong and good a relationship is, the weaker and more shaky that relationship is in reality. And there's definitely been the whiff of that in recent years, in the way that it's just been so important for the British side to talk about the special relationship whenever the leaders of the UK and US get together. And there's always been kind of a two-level view of the special relationship. The view of the strategic level, which is that America has never had a special relationship with Britain. If it has had special relationships with any nations, those nations have been Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Republic of Ireland. Certainly not Britain. And in fact, since the war and during the Second World War itself, the US treated Britain quite badly, or maybe not badly, maybe that's a value judgment, but treated Britain ruthlessly, mercilessly when it was weak. And in that sense, there has been no special relationship at all. But then there's also been the individual level where, for instance, you speak to special forces officers, so the head of British special forces during the Falklands campaign, who will say that the relationship Britain's military had with the Americans was crucial in getting their hands on all kinds of fancy high-tech kit, or in early 80s terms, fancy high-tech kit that was invaluable during the Falklands campaign. And it all came through back channels and through non-official channels. And there has been, to a certain degree, on both sides of the Atlantic, a mixed feeling. In the British establishment, certainly as recently as the 1990s, there was some in the British establishment who held America in a certain amount of disdain or even loathing. People like John le Carré, the famous spy author, for example, might be a great example of that, because of the way that the US so ruthlessly and aggressively usurped Britain's position in the world. And on the American side, an absolute disdain for the British and kind of a dislike for Britain. Certainly nothing in terms of friendship, but that was all leavened with a genuine friendship among certain aspects of those very same establishments and elites. You only had to listen to Tucker Carlson when Her Late Majesty the Queen passed away and listen to his monologue on Fox News, the television station which employed Carlson then, to know that there was some genuine warmth for the old country as well. But speaking of Tucker Carlson, that brings us on to the present day situation. Both Philip and I have spoken on Multipolarity and privately how it seems that there's an increasing gap between the way Britain views its relationship with the US and the way Britain would like its relationship with the US to be, and the reality. There's an increasing break, an increasing gap, an increasing cleavage between the two nations. The Atlantic Ocean is widening in that respect. And Tucker Carlson recently visited the UK and, well, his recent monologue before his interview with Piers Morgan, the British media figure, and that interview itself was withering in its judgment of the UK. And I think that's very much a reflection of the way the MAGA crowd, the America First crowd, increasingly views the UK. This is incredibly dangerous for the United Kingdom. And I think it's something that bears talking about. And Philip Pilkington, you this week on X, formerly Twitter, have been talking about it to a certain degree and providing hints as to what this might entail, what it involves now, and what it might mean for the future if Britain crack up. And I think that's what we should talk about this week on what is a Patreon exclusive episode. You need to pay your £5, dollars, euros per month. You'll get this episode where we're going to go into a great deal of depth in the situation at the moment, why the special relationship is cracking, what it means right now, and what it will mean for the future of Britain, which is nothing good, believe me. And you'll also get your hands on our back catalogue. So if you have not done so already, visit Patreon, search for Multipolarity, the podcast, and give us like less than the cost of a beer in London. Come on, do it. Cough up. Anyway, Philip Pilkington, give us the lowdown.
Yeah, I think the Tucker Carlson interview with Piers Morgan, which was pretty awful, actually, was just the two of them arguing as if they were in a bar or something like that. But it was really, I mean, it was the tone of it, yeah, sure, but it was mainly kind of the monologue, as you say. I suppose we should be very specific about this. I tend to agree with you that there was never really a special relationship. America had its favourite children, and they're the ones that you named. In later years, you might count Qatar in that as well. They've had an interesting relationship with Qatar because of the military base there. But really, it's Israel, Ireland, and Saudi Arabia, and they get kind of special treatment. And actually, if you take Saudi Arabia out of that, because Saudi Arabia are bringing something clear to the table, which is the swing producer of oil, you really only have Israel and the Republic of Ireland left. Ireland gets a lot of foreign direct investment. Israel gets almost limitless backing in anything it does, in effect, and a lot of weaponry. And for that, the United States gets pretty much nothing from either country, let's be honest. And those relationships are due to the lobbies, the ethnic lobbies, the Irish lobby, the Irish-American lobby, and the Israeli-American lobby. And I think those could be called special relationships. What America's had with Britain is not in the same league at all, but it was the relationship that does exist, to the extent that it exists, and I think it used to anyway, has been extremely important for Britain. In fact, Britain has kind of reshaped itself to look like the ideal partner for America. It's like people say that people who have dogs for a long time come to resemble their dogs. I think this might be a case of the pet coming to resemble the master, the other way around. But that's certainly what's happened. The entire British economy has become structured around this financialized model, basically an outpost of the city of Wall Street and so on. And maybe we'll go into that. But so I agree with you on all that. But what maintained this relationship between the two countries? What maintained this relationship was actually quite straightforward. It was an ethnic link, but it was not an ethnic link like we saw between Ireland and America or Israel and America, where basically the ethnic link was on a kind of on the population at large, on the Irish-American population at large, and on the Jewish-American population at large. What existed in America was a very small group of Anglophiles who were quite powerful. Not very powerful. Back in the day, they were probably very powerful. You might think World War I, just before World War I, just after. Think of the likes of Wilson, Coolidge, these kind of people. They're the kind of pinnacle of the Anglo-American relationship. And basically, these people modeled themselves on English gentlemen. They were the elite that were born out of intermarriage between rich Americans and British aristocrats. Churchill is one of them. Churchill's mother, famously, is American. Not widely discussed, but very relevant to British history in the 20th century, not often commented on. That was the high point of that relationship. Those people had a mutual family in common. One side was mimicking the other. In that sense, the British were bringing something to the table. They were bringing kind of culture and breeding, as they might have said, and the Americans would kind of mimic that. Harvard was a kind of knockoff of Oxbridge in a lot of ways. I know Harvard is very old, but it was remade to look like that. The Ivies in general were made to look like that. And that persisted. It weakened over time.
Hello there, this is Andy Collingwood. Here at Multipolarity, we work every week to bring you the freshest thinking in geopolitics. In order to do that, we reserve 1/4 of our episodes, so that's one episode in 4, and make those exclusively available to people who make this show possible, our subscribers. Previously, that's a benefit we've only made available on Patreon. But as our YouTube audience has grown, we've decided to let listeners subscribe directly on that platform too, via the memberships option. Simply click the join button and select our first tier, Palmerston, Basic Gunboat Diplomacy. Doing so will give you not only access to the new premium episodes, but access to our war chest of over 25 previous premium episodes too. And as a YouTube exclusive, you can also get access to our occasional Multipolarity Dialogues episodes 1 week early if you subscribe to the higher Metanic tier. So what have you got to lose? For less than the price of a beer in a pub, at least in London, much less, you can have 1/3 more multipolarity in your life. That's not just common sense, it's maths. Okay, bye for now. See you on the other side of the paywall.
In Australia, just after he got elected. And this was, again, these kind of waspy elites recoiling in horror at what was happening in America, which is the sense that you get.